but the perspective I have is these institutions are less functional. I don't think the CIA is doing anything quite like MK Ultra anymore.
Why do you think that?
I think you had the Church Commission hearings in the late 70s, and somehow things got exposed, and then when bureaucracy is forced to be formalized, it probably becomes a lot less functional.
Yes, folks, there's one of our kings, I guess we're calling him now. I don't know. Peter Thiel there, talking with one of our key spokespeople of the new regime, Joe Rogan, about how the problem with intelligence is it's inefficient since COINTELPRO and MK Ultra got exposed. I think that's actually, unless you have something to say about that, David, I think that's maybe a good time to bring in our guest right away.
That's great.
Alex Avina, he is historian, author of Specters of Revolution, Peasant Guerrillas in the Cold War Mexican Countryside, also contributor to Foreign Exchange's Substack. Alex, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey guys, thank you so much for having me.
So our heads are spinning a little bit here, and I wanted to get your perspective on particularly, let's start with the USAID conversation here, because, I think, and you can probably fill us in on the history of that organization and why some people might not be so upset to see it, and why it might not be the best photo op for the start of a resistance. I'm curious, how do you react to it? Where do you even start, Alex?
It's just so pathetic. I mean, that's the Democratic Party has more or less rolled over since Trump's since the Trump regime started, and to see them come out for once and offer a little bit of defense for USAID is just so it's pathetic and dispiriting, but also not entirely surprising. So USAID since the early 1960s has been an arm of imperial U.S. soft power, right? So it becomes a program that gets started under the Kennedy administration. And it's essentially, their website says it, right? They're all about expanding democracy throughout the world and also celebrating and helping to impose free markets as a way to help with the language of the 60s would be something like economic modernization. The language that they use more recently is a little different. But so it's an arm of the U.S. empire that operates through soft power. It's no coincidence that it starts in the early 1960s during the John F. Kennedy administration. They were pretty freaked out by what was going on in Cuba, and they were and they had also lost at the Bay of Pigs invasion. So they were trying to figure out other cheaper, less politically costly ways of destabilizing governments that they termed to be regimes antithetical to U.S. interests, and to convince other global South nations to be on their side. And in the long history of USAID, there's so many controversies that we can talk about if you guys want, but there's a couple that stand out. One is the Office of Public Safety was a foreign police training program that was part of USAID, and this was like U.S. police officers training death squads in Latin America, teaching police agencies and death squads in Latin America on how to torture, how to disappear, how to take people out. And this is really captured in that. The most famous incident happened with a OPS officer named Dan Mitrione, who was actually in Brazil during the 1960s training death squads, and then he went to Uruguay, and the Tupamaro urban guerrillas kidnapped him. They demanded 150 prisoners in exchange for him. The Uruguayan and U.S. governments refused, so they executed him. And this is all captured in Costa Gravas' famous movie, State of Siege. A more recent, I think, funny USAID story is when they tried to set up like a Twitter in Cuba in the 2010s. I can't remember the name. It was like Zun Zuseo or something like that. And they were trying to get Cubans to join a Twitter that was trying to do regime change in Cuba, and it failed miserably. But some, tens of thousands of Cubans inadvertently or unknowingly participated in this social media experiment with regime change.
So, I mean, given its history, it's kind of surprising in a few ways that, like, for example, like a country that just now has like Marco Rubio, in a very significant position of power, would want to cut it, right? Like, is it purely because it's doing woke stuff abroad that we're seeing the Trump administration come after it?
Honestly, I think the Trump administration doesn't care about this like ideological soft power stuff. So part of it, I think, I think some of it they're able to use the language of anti-wokeness, but that's more of a justification for cutting USAID. I mean, I think the way I read what Trump and his people are doing is they're shock doctrining the United States right now. They're plundering, they're privatizing, and they're going to try to make out like bandits for the next 4 years through whole-scale privatization, and they're moving quickly. So I think USAID is just another aspect of that broader process of theft. But if anything, Trump and leaders throughout the global South from his first administration would credit Trump with just completely doing the mask off of U.S. empire. They don't really give a shit about this kind of soft power approach to U.S. empire. I mean, the fangs are out; they don't care, and that's one good. I think the one productive thing that Trump has done, right? Like he's, I think, really helped bring down the mask of U.S. empire. Also helped by Genocide Joe, right? But this was something
that's what I was going to ask.
Did. Yeah.
As a historian, like, is it too soon to say we're like entering a new era? Like, not just the Doge, but like you said, the Gaza genocide era, where we're talking about democracy. Is that have we spent the credibility on that? Like,
I hope so. Yeah. I mean, honestly, like, I don't know what else it would take for people within the U.S. and outside of the U.S. to really see like the emperor with no clothes on now at this point, particularly after 15 months of just horrific genocide in Gaza. And, just because the ceasefire was announced, it's just like a slower form of genocide now occurring because people aren't getting the everyday necessities that they need. And they're genociding Palestinians in the West Bank. So we'll see. I don't know. I think Trump did a lot during his first administration, again, to kind of just reveal what U.S. imperial power really is about power, about plunder, about forcing countries to do what they don't want to do. And I think what Joe Biden revealed with his support and complicity in the genocide of Palestinians is to, intensify that. I mean, so the Colombian president Gustavo Petro gave a speech at the COP28, where he linked climate change, migration from the global South and Gaza. And he basically said, look, what they're doing in Gaza is like a preview of what they're going to do to migrants from the global South who are forced to go to the global North as a consequence of climate change and U.S. imperial policies that force people to leave their homes, that rob people of their right to stay home. And I think he was right. Like, he has a great line in which he said, the Europeans and the North Americans have allowed Hitler into their homes. And these are all kind of like Hitlerite countries. And I know it's hard to disagree with that assessment based on what we're seeing.
Well, I know that we want to get a little bit more into the Mexico stuff in this tariff two-step in a second. But I mean, I want to ask you then, as like as a historian, as someone who's engaged in politics. I mean, I think like we can look at the Democrats. Actually, let me play this really quick because it's too funny, and I think this probably be my only chance to do it. Gerald Connolly, who one of the young, spry members of the Democratic Party, this is what he said about Elon Musk and USAID. Let me just get this.
And if you're sitting down now, you won't be in a second.
Rousing speech here.
And Elon, if you want to run AID, get nominated by Trump and go to the Senate, and good luck in getting confirmed.
He would get confirmed.
That's the
sad thing. That's the sad thing. He would get confirmed.
I think you're totally right. I mean, it really is kind of a perfect encapsulation of one, just like how bad these people are fighting for something, and then also what it is that they're fighting for. One, they wouldn't successfully stop Musk from getting confirmed. And two, again, it's like this program that is the one that they're willing to go so hard for has this kind of sordid history. But I mean, apart from how terrible the Democrats are, I want to kind of ask you, is like, okay, but this major program is getting pulled back, right? And is there a worry that we should have that, like, okay, yes, money's not flowing to these certain kind of programs, but is there a kind of anxiety that it's now the Trump administration was not going to basically replace these kind of things with anything better?
Yeah, I think that remains to be seen. Perhaps. I mean, I think there's been a long controversy over the role of USAID. Especially with the kind of rules that they force upon NGOs, the type of on the ground social groups, community organizations that NGOs are allowed to work with that are receiving money from USAID. So I'm sure there's going to be a negative impact. They must be doing some okay projects, but it just might be another thing that gets privatized, right? If it gets privatized, it's going to make money for certain nefarious interests close to Trump, or it just gets erased, right? Like this is one of the easy things that they can cut from U.S. government expenditures as they try to privatize, deregulate, and cut social spending. I think some of it too has to do with this myth that you see on the right in the US, that the US is somehow some like magnanimous provider of like foreign aid assistance to the world, which is like such a tiny percentage of our GDP. And it just in real terms, it's not that much money that the US provides in terms of like just foreign assistance. So I'm sure there'll be some NGOs or some groups that will, not have a very good time being cut off from US dollars. But I think in the broader scheme of things, USAID is just another way of trying to implement this soft power that Trump and his allies really don't have any use for. And we see, I mean, it's really interesting to see how they're moving, which is, again, not all that different from the Democrats. Like when it comes to like US imperial policy, the Democrats and Republicans are, they're one party, as Julius Nyerere famously said, right? Like, it's just that they use different rhetoric, different justifications, different explanations. They have a different rhetorical style. But like when it comes to like U.S. foreign policy, where it comes to like U.S. border policy and migration, it's really hard to discern the differences. They might have some individuals within the Democratic Party that are articulating a different message. But historically, at least since when it comes to migrants and the border, at least since the 80s and 90s, they both have been saying the same thing.
Yeah. I think if USAID was, all mosquito nets and, food for starving people, it'd be a lot probably easier to defend than it's looking like right now. And
it probably should be. It should be stuff like that, right? Like that would be foreign assistance, and that would actually help the U.S.
Yeah, and there should be a lot in
there. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and there should be anger at folks who like want to. I think like this is not a time for maintenance, but to the extent you want to maintain these structures, there should be anger at good-meaning people who to find out that actually these have been used for some of the most heinous and like politically reactionary purposes through the history, and we're trying to get people medicine. It's like it's reached its terminal point. It was never going to ultimately work.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, they've also been used to meddle in elections, right? So there's a contradiction built into the program from its very inception. It was a way to wage counterinsurgency or advance U.S. geopolitical interests in a soft power way. And they've done some good things and they've done a lot of bad things. But it's part of a Cold War U.S. imperial policy.
Actually, you mentioned Cuba earlier. What's your take on this Guantanamo declaration that they're going to start deporting or caging 30,000 people there? I mean, and also this Bukele thing today, where he's going to take. I'm curious what your perspective is on that.
It's terrible. It's I go back to that Gustavo Petro quote, right? And it's like that the U.S. and the Europeans have let Hitler in, and this is a manifestation of that. So Guantanamo, I mean, the easiest way to have solved this issue a while back, particularly during the Obama administration, was to have closed Guantanamo and then actually give it back to the Cubans because it's Cuban territory. And they play this game every year where the U.S. Pays a lease for Guantanamo into an account that the Cubans never touch because the Cubans want their territory back. They don't want this money that's accruing in some sort of bank account. But Guantanamo is being used for a similar, concentration camp of Haitian immigrants during the 1980s and 1990s, particularly Haitians who were believed to be ill with AIDS or HIV, based on the analysis or the take of U.S. Migration officials. So in the early 90s, they had essentially became a concentration camp for Haitian migrants who were fleeing a difficult situation in Haiti. And then, we have obviously what happens, the way it's used in the war on terror as like a space of exception where where U.S. rules and regulations don't apply to unlawful enemy combatants, right? That terminology that George W. Bush lawyers invented to justify indefinite detention of people that they had picked up throughout the world as quote unquote terrorists, right? And the really sick legal justifications that John Yoo went back to the Seminole Wars of the 19th century to make a legal case to justify the indefinite detention of Al-Qaeda, alleged Al-Qaeda and other terrorists. So it's horrible. I think that the difference here is the scale of it, right? So they want to ramp up the scale of Guantanamo to hold up up to 30,000. And that's just one big ass concentration camp. It's going to be much worse than we've seen in the past in terms of the way that the U.S. government has used Guantanamo as a space of lawlessness where they can just disappear people. Bukele's thing that I just saw recently too is just, man, it's such a shameless bootlicking attempt by Bukele, who's just, he's in the 1930s, FDR supposedly said of the dictator of Nicaragua back then, he said, he may be a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. And that's who Bukele is today. He's violated the Salvadorian constitution to run for power, to run for the presidency multiple times. But somehow the U.S. government, Republican or Democrat, they've been cool with that. But they go after other Latin American leaders who they don't like, and they identify as being enemies of Latin America and the U.S., like Nicolás Maduro in Venezuela. So that's just awful. It's just externalizing trying to export and externalize some of the internal contradictions that the U.S. society is going through right now, and it's horrible. The level of human suffering is awful.
Yeah, I wonder. Trump took a shot at Bukele at the RNC last summer, and everyone was kind of like, did he mean to do that? And I wonder if it was to basically discipline him into, you're going to deliver for us, jails when we need them.
Yeah, maybe. He also, I think, confused at one point El Salvador with Caracas. Yeah. So,
right.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I think there's also actually, I was lecturing about this in one of my classes today. There's just this built-in, part of the long history of U.S. Latin American relations is the U.S. essentially believing from John Adams that Latin Americans were racially and culturally incapable of ruling themselves, particularly ruling themselves democratically. So Nixon has a famous quote from the mid-50s where he's like, oh, Latinos have a preference for dictatorship, not democracy. The problem is that the U.S. supports what they consider to be dictatorships, as long as it's convenient and amenable to their geopolitical interests, while they will they'll use things like USAID to destabilize democratically elected countries that they see as enemies of their designs for the region. So it's interesting to see how Bukele has his own caucus in Congress, right? Founded by one Matt Gaetz. So there's a Bukele caucus in Congress, just based on advancing the interests and the ideas of this dictator in El Salvador.
I'm just saying it's very embarrassing. I think actually the way that a lot of these super young online Republicans have idolized Bukele. And it's very worrying when you realize that one of these kind of super online guys has the presidency ear, and Elon Musk. But I don't know how much you're exposed to this kind of stuff. But there is this fawning for somebody like Bukele because he's gotten rid of all these weak things like constitutions, democratic rights, that you can see really the nasty underbelly of what a lot of Republicans would like to be able to get away with here. Which is why it is so frightening to hear Marco Rubio. I don't know how serious we can take this news yet. I think, it is because they didn't agree to it. They just sort of said he offered it.
Yeah. I think Rubio said thank you, but we have to look at, he said something like we have to look at legalities and we have the Constitution.
I mean, could you imagine? I mean, really, like, yeah. I mean, but it is something that, like, people should take seriously. I mean,
Yeah.
we've seen, the attacks on our democratic freedoms in this country, to even just be able to criticize a foreign nation in Israel, right? I mean, down the road from me here in Austin, I mean, the assaults and the attacks on students and professors and all these people at major public universities for that kind of thing. I mean, the ability of these people to sort of tear up those documents that they claim to hold very dear, should be very alarming to folks.
Yeah, and I think it's really weird how certain segments of the U.S. right for the last like 10 years have taken ideas and concepts from Latin American fascists and made them their own, right? So like the Bukele caucus, the way they talk about Bukele is really frightening. But then somebody like some New York State Republican politician, I don't know if she's state level or federal level, Vicky Palladino or something, and she's like retweeting that helicopter image of like, leftists getting thrown out of helicopters, which is like a Pinochet thing. And the right has been doing that since 2015, 2016, when like the Proud Boys and that whole thing became a thing, and they started using this Latin American fascist symbology. And it's only gotten worse since then, right? Especially now with someone like Elon Musk complaining about the poor Boers and white South Afrikaners, right? So it's frightening, man. Like 10 years ago, we could be, that's kind of scary, not good, and now it's they control the levers of political power, and it's frightening.
Yeah, the only hope is they misidentify somebody as an enemy or a friend. That kind of brings me to, you mentioned Gustavo Petro. He famously had a back and forth with Trump over tariffs. Claudia Sheinbaum, back and forth over tariffs. I'm curious, this part, could there be, on top of your analysis of that, about the international array against Trump? Like maybe, I'm hoping everyone can gang up on us a little bit and say America's a problem. But I'm curious what your takeaway was from the tariff tiff with Mexico.
Oh man, it's just, it's so stupid. So one, I'm glad that Claudia Sheinbaum is the current president of Mexico, because I think she's handled it as well as you can. I mean, it helps that Trump has been saying he's going to be doing this since his campaign last year, and actually during his first presidential term, he did levy tariffs on Mexico, and Mexico retaliated, and they reached an agreement really quickly to not have tariffs. So this is not the first time that Trump has done this type of thing against Mexico. And what Trump and most U.S. political leaders, what they refuse to acknowledge is that Mexico has leverage in this relationship. They have economic leverage, and the fact that these economies are so thoroughly economically intertwined, extremely since NAFTA in the 1990s, but this is a long historical relationship that goes back to the late 19th century. And Mexico also, there's also a 2,000-mile long thing called the U.S.-Mexico border that is not just controlled by the U.S. Like Mexico has control over it too. So I mean, I wish, I think Sheinbaum's trying to be very prudent and very cautious in terms of how she deals with this madman. But there's leftists in Mexico, and I would include myself in a group that would hope that she would be a bit more aggressive in using that leverage, particularly over the question of migration. I mean, there's reports that basically said that she's accepting to continue the Remain in Mexico policy, which I think is terrible. It's a terrible policy to continue. Mexico has a long history of, there is one legacy of actually welcoming refugees and exiles into Mexico, fleeing horrific things from their home countries. I wish there was something similar being done today, as opposed to working as the U.S.'s border patrol, which is essentially what Mexico's been doing. Definitely like the last 2 years. That's why we have such a low number of quote unquote encounters at the border. That's another irony in this whole situation. The encounters at the border have been extremely low for more than a year. Even though that fact isn't really reflected in the U.S. mainstream media. And the reason for that is that Mexico's using its National Guard to serve as a U.S. border patrol. So they're setting up checkpoints throughout the country, and they're not allowing refugees and migrants from reaching the U.S.-Mexico border. So for Trump to make these threats at this point, I mean, there's there's no material reality that should have motivated him to start making these threats. And I think Wall Street kind of disciplined him a little bit. And I think Sheinbaum's performance was as prudent as possible in this situation.
Well, just so catching people up a little bit, and just correct me if I'm wrong. Basically, Trump has been making these threats for a while, but basically starts pushing it over the weekend that we're going to do this 25%. Everybody's worried. I'll tell you, grocery store here, everyone's freaking out because, by the way, that's what happened the last time when Greg Abbott shut down border crossings from Texas to Mexico. Was at 22 or something like that, and it was disastrous. I mean, it took literally hours for them to have to reverse it because the United States and Mexico have a strong relationship, but like this place really has a strong relationship. Trade, like there's no food on the shelves, literally. So this happens. People are freaking out about it. They speak, and we can maybe talk about the Trudeau stuff, but basically very different tact from Trudeau, who gets like very, very worked up about Trump calling Canada the 51st state or whatever. But Sheinbaum basically not only makes this negotiation, but she says, okay, we'll do 10,000 National Guard troops at the border, at the U.S.-Mexico border, and we'll do something about fentanyl, and just kind of vague. But she also got the concession of Trump saying that they would look into doing something about the American arms trade into Mexico, right? I mean,
yeah, right, yeah. That would be great. I mean, Americans doing gun control. Yeah, right.
I think that's fair. That's fair. But I will say, I think that's like, it's a pretty, it's at least a decent concession from Trump to say like, oh yeah, we'll do something about this problem. But maybe I'm too rose tinted glasses over here.
No, I mean, so I think that the difference between how Trudeau and Canada handled it versus Mexico and Sheinbaum is really instructive, right? Trudeau didn't follow his father's legacy, Fidel, and he went the weak route. So, and what did he get out of it? He got. I think they asked Trump a couple nights ago, what can Canada do to like prevent the tariffs? And he said, become the 51st state, which is so bonkers, right? Whereas I think Sheinbaum negotiated, they pushed back, and because again, I think Mexico has real leverage, economic leverage, social leverage, and political leverage. And so yeah, she said that they would send 10,000 National Guard troops to the border. I mean, over the course of last year, there's been higher numbers at the US-Mexico
I mean,
border.
apparently they've this deployment has happened before, right? And
and they're deployed throughout the country. Like Mexico has become the wall, and the National Guard, the Mexican National Guard, which was set up during Andrés Manuel López Obrador's presidency to ostensibly as like a anti-narco fighting unit that's been mostly used to patrol migrants coming from the Caribbean or from South America, from Central America. So for her to promise, like, I'm going to take 10,000, they're all over the country doing this type of work, right? So it's an easy thing to say because it's already happening. She's not, they're not going to lose anything. And then the fentanyl thing, I mean, it's just in the mind of the U.S. right and the Republicans and the Democrats, right, conflating the issue of migration with the issue of drug trafficking. And these Trump has this like sicario mindset, right? Like, and a lot of people in the US, I think, have that mindset. That's how they read Mexico, right? They look at Mexico, they put on the sepia filter lens that you see whenever you watch a movie that has to, or a show that has to do with Mexico. And they conflate really complex issues into the specter of the evil migrant who's trafficking fentanyl across the Sonoran Desert where I live close to, which is like one of the most ridiculous things that ever, we know that over 80% of the traffickers who get caught are trafficking fentanyl are U.S. citizens. And where do they get caught? Like 90% of the time at international points of entry. So it's just, anyway. But yeah, I think Sheinbaum's, her ability to extract that promise from Trump is huge because something like 75% of the weapons that criminal organizations in Mexico use come from the U.S. and mostly from Southwest and Texas. So if they actually did something, that would have a huge impact in minimizing the violence that we see in Mexico.
And it's such a detail that does run contrary to the sort of lizard brain view of Mexico that Americans are conditioned to have, which is like, oh, maybe it's not, maybe all of their problems aren't them and their inferiority. Maybe some of this, whether it's the drugs demand or gun supply, has a little bit to do with what's going on in maybe our politics right now.
I mean, I think the U.S. is the world's largest narco state. And it's that demand that has historically, past and present driven drug production in Mexico. I mean, it's a market and it's been a market for more than 100 years. the things that change are like the scale of the traffic, the scale of the economy, and which go through boom and bust cycles, and also the type of drugs getting trafficked. But the relationship, Mexican criminal organizations meeting U.S. demand for illicit drugs. I mean, that's over 100 years old. You would think that we would have figured this shit out by now. And I think obviously some people in the U.S. have, but it's a really useful political cudgel to use against migrants, to use against brown people who live in the U.S.-Mexico borderlands. And as we've seen the last 10, 15 years, it does a lot to rile up certain sectors of U.S. society to get them to participate politically, which is, these are the people who are Trump's base.
Well, I mean, just on this more broadly, I mean, I know this is a Twitter account, but this is one of these. I think this was formerly Biden's wins, then it was Kamala Harris's wins, and now it's Democratic wins. Right. So these aren't random people, right? These are people who have association with these campaigns. And this was one of the quote unquote Democratic wins from just the other day. Breaking. New data just exposed Donald Trump for deporting less people in 1 week than President Biden averaged per week, while deporting a lower percentage of criminals. This is more evidence of Trump's incompetence. Which is like, again, this is like a very particular view of like, weird shit that you see on Twitter. But I will say that I think Democrats have a really difficult time talking about this issue at all. Because they either go full on like, let's get folks out of here, or it's this kind of vague position on the board. I'm just curious, your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why I call them children of men Democrats. I mean, they fundamentally, at least since Bill Clinton, they've accepted the Republican political premises when it comes to understanding migration and quote unquote border security. So anytime you hear a politician, Republican or Democrat, talking about border security, what they're really talking about is a particular form of border carceral network mixed with the militarization of the border that's really good at brutalizing and murdering migrants. Because the very idea that the U.S. needs border security from migrants is pretty ridiculous. And that's not even taking into account that like the U.S. needs their labor, right? Really big, important sectors of the U.S. economy thrive on undocumented migrant labor. And the bosses actually benefit a lot because this is the most hyper exploited, least protected labor force in the country. So what the Democrats do is that they accept the premises offered by right-wing white supremacist revanchists when it comes to understanding the border, when it comes to understanding migration. So all they're left with is to say, well, we're not as bloodthirsty. We won't cage kids, or we won't separate kids from their families, but we'll do things like install smart walls along the U.S.-Mexico border, or we'll use smart technology to brutalize migrants along the U.S.-Mexico border. We just won't throw them into cages.
We'll have an app.
Or have an app, right? So it accomplishes the same thing, even though the style and the rhetoric is a little different. So that tweet, which when I saw it drove me insane, right? Like, we're the more efficient, the better deporters than Trump. That idiot can't do anything right. It's like,
which, and by the way,
sorry, David, imagine if that narrative takes hold, what Trump is incentivized to do then?
Yeah.
Like step up.
I mean, that's what I was going to get. Is like Republicans who I know, they will say literally this is they hear people on the left calling like Obama the deporter in chief, and I'm not saying that that's wrong to call him that. What I'm saying is like when the Democrats actually do that kind of stuff and also draw a lot of attention to it, then the Republicans are like, yeah, why are you guys upset with it now? Like we're doing it less than you were, right?
Yeah, yeah, and they have a point. I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, so there's the broader issue here is that by the Democrats giving into the premises of border security migration that Republicans and the extreme right have offered since the 1990s, that actually never leads to a compromise that Democrats think it's going to lead to. It actually fuels the most revanchist political base in the United States. So that was Obama's trick. Obama's trick was to say, okay, we're going to do the Dreamers. And actually, DACA and the Dreamers only came about because you had really brave young people who mobilized, organized, and forced the Democrats to give them protection. And even that was premised on the idea that they were the good immigrants and their parents were the bad immigrants, which is also super insulting. So Obama tried to do the thing where he's like, well, we're going to do border security. We're going to continue to amp up a border militarization that has killed more than 10,000 people since the mid-1990s. And the numbers are probably 50, 60, 70,000. We're going to prove to the Republicans that we're serious about border security, and we're serious about getting undocumented migrants out, hence the deporter-in-chief title. But we're going to do things like things like the Dreamers, and we're going to push Congress to finally pass 3 words that are like the most fantastical words in the lexicon of U.S. politics: comprehensive immigration reform. And then that allows the executive to kind of kick that off to the Congress, where Congress is never going to do any of this because of all sorts of internal contradictions, right? And that little game that Democrats have been playing, that of triangulation that starts with Clinton, has only fueled movements that Trump represents and embodies. It makes things worse. And they can then turn around and say, well, you guys did it, so why can't we do it?
And like literally, like, I mean, one of the things we've been doing while looking at the recent history has been seeing like how Obama really did make a lot of these things worse with these gambits that he would do. I mean, there might have been an opening. I mean, people forget, but like wanted to have some form of, a shift, and the Republicans freaked out at him and basically did a coup against him. But that should have been read as like a political opening, maybe for the Democrats. But instead, you get Obama being like, "Oh, I'm going to do my special move, which is where I talk really nice about an idea and then endorse like the most harsh version of it." Yeah. I mean, it really, and we're way worse off now, 15 years later.
Totally. I mean, but I love Bush terminology was the whole enchilada. That's how we refer to comprehensive immigration reform. And what ruined it was 9/11. Yeah, I mean, so there was a coup, right? Because again, the Republicans are also a coalition. I mean, they're much more disciplined, right? But they're also a coalition that Reagan helped put together in the 80s and kind of disciplined them into getting along, right? So you had the neocons, you had the Christian right. You had these like Pat Buchanan, white supremacist paleocons, and they hated Reagan too for doing immigration reform, right? And so-called amnesty that he did in the mid to late 1980s. And he also played that game. He did amnesty, and then he also ramped up border militarization and made drug trafficking like a threat to national security. But there was that moment. You're right. It was a brief moment. George W. Bush also touted his close friendship with the then president of Mexico, Vicente Fox, who's turned into a complete madman, anti-Semitic madman. Sheinbaum like broke his brain. Like that guy. I don't think he's back on Twitter anymore. But there was a brief moment.
There's a while in the last Trump administration where Vicente Fox would come on to every cable news show that would book him and say the F word at Donald Trump. He'd be like, I'm not building your fucking wall.
He's so crazy. But yeah, that was one moment, and 9/11 disrupted that, and that helped then bring like a war on drugs with a war on terror logic to a war on immigrants, and it all converged in the 2000s, and Obama reacted to that by his little effort to triangulate, and it's only made things worse. It really fueled the kind of revanchism that we see embodied in Trump's political base.
Yeah, I mean, it's made that kind of politics mainstream, frankly.
Yeah. I mean, do you see any possibility that any of this gets better?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's probably what I've seen domestically that's given me a little hope is to see protests start to break out now, and it's migrants, it's supporter of migrants. I mean, there's a protest today in Iowa City of all places, right? So I hope we continue to see that. It's really like reminds me of 2006, 2007 when you had massive migrant rallies and protests emerge, and I hope that happens again, because the people at the top aren't going to save us, as they're too busy asking Elon Musk to get confirmed in the Senate. Internationally, I think the interesting thing about this Mexico-U.S. conflict is that a couple things. One, if Trump, after 30 days, that's the limit, the pause that they have right now. I mean, they're going to push Mexico closer to China, and they're going to push Mexico closer to BRICS. And if that's the case, then China's already the number one trading partner for South American countries. And Mexico's like the one country that stands out as still being the number one trading partner for the U.S. And two, a recent an interview that I watched Marco Rubio give, where he basically said, we've sanctioned the world to death and it hasn't worked. And if anything, they're starting to create their own parallel economic transaction systems to get around our sanctions. They're not letting us sanction them anymore. So I think we're going to start. I think geopolitically on a global scale, I see a little bit of promise in that. But here domestically, it's really bad. It's going to get bad. And But what I saw in LA this weekend, here in Phoenix, in other parts of the country, I think it gives me a little bit of hope.
Yeah, I mean, I think the energy from people is palpable on a lot of these things. It's not being translated into politics. I don't see that, but yeah, I generally like people are really tuned into what's going on, I think.
I think the party of Fetterman and my two senators here, they're not offering a lot of hope on a way forward. So it's going to have to be from below, as usual. As
yeah,
usual.
I don't think Schumer and Jeffries aren't really the really the two ideal. Alexander Avina, alexanderavina.com. You can check out Specters of Revolution, Peasant Guerrillas in the Cold War, Mexican countryside. Follow him on Twitter. Anything else you'd like to plug?
No, I don't know, man. I don't know what's going on. No, that's about it. Just follow me on Twitter. And thank you guys for having me on. This is a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
No, seriously, it was great chatting with you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what it is. It's no help coming from up on high, which,
I was afraid to ask about optimism, but I agree with, that sentiment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I think that most people are generally good and don't want these horrible things that I think are coming down the line.
We should turn into misanthropes, David. Just where we actually hate people. Like 90% of people are bad. Don't and fuck around and find out. Anytime something bad happens.
One of those freaks, yeah, just like going down to South Texas, and be like, "Well, this is what you guys," yeah, the psychopaths.
While we are kind of talking about tariffs, do you want to check in about how our boy PBD is sort of dealing with the tariff issue?
I can't imagine anything that I'm more interested in, frankly.
So Patrick Bet-David, former insurance salesman, life insurance sort of kingpin, I guess you'd call it, was on with Laura Ingraham. And Ingram's interesting because like she has a little bit of sense of her own person. She's not just willing to go along with the slipstream. I mean, I think she did before Elon made it, the "my heart goes out to you" slogan.
Yeah, she famously went Roman.
She did the 45-degree angle Roman salute to Trump in the 2016 RNC. But anyway, Ingram's talking with Patrick Bet-David, and she gets the kind of what everyone's realizing, which is that Trump is saying he got commitments that were already announced. And did he maybe back down from his frankly stupid they're called tariffs, but really when you do across the board stuff, people point out those are sanctions. If we're going to sanction Mexico and Canada, here's Ingram and Patrick Bet-David.
Some other concessions, but I think President Trump saw a huge negative reaction to this, as I know you predicted, I predicted, from Wall Street, from the markets, from all the establishment types. Do you think he reacted to that? Or maybe some of his advisors said, whoa, we gotta rethink this?
I think President Trump is a guy that, in my opinion, likes to ask people, what do you think behind closed doors? But at the end of the day, he's a strategist. He's thinking 5, 10, 15 moves ahead. And he knows he has the leverage card. He's going to be pushing his weight around, and he ought to be, because it's about time somebody on America negotiated on our behalf in ways where we're not being taken advantage of. I love the fact that within 5 days, Colombia came out talking.
Now just look at like Ingram's face, because she asked him a fairly specific thing.
Yeah.
And it's genius how he is able to sort of go back into his general talking points of Trump is a deal maker. Trump, he goes behind closed doors and asks people what they think. But also he doesn't give a fuck about that. He's ahead of everybody. And Ingram's just sort of there like, no, but what are we actually getting from these negotiations here? And even like the Colombia stuff, like I don't know that necessarily like accepting flights is really the big get that would say.
As if they're tough at 3:40 a.m. in the morning. He's sending a tweet. Who knows if he was drunk or not? Then you have Panama coming out. Now you got Canada, then you got Mexico, and then today Zelensky is talking about the fact.
1 second, I think I froze. Can you still see it?
No, but I can hear it. We can hear it.
Yeah, let
No
me,
problem. Which is all we really need.
That's enough, Patrick. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's great. I mean, they need to get a Trump wins account up and going on Twitter so we can see what he is achieving with all of these. Because literally all of those examples are all Trump has gotten involved and made a bunch of headlines and hasn't really moved the needle much. I mean, the biggest one probably would be the Zelensky, where basically Trump has said that they will continue giving military aid if they let Elon Musk get some lithium from Ukraine. This is like, okay, is that a big win for America or against the war machine? I don't know, Pat.
Again, I think the campaign promise was we're going to end that day one, and he's just going to tell Vladimir to stop. It turns out, both one of those.
We have to get the rare earth. He doesn't even call it minerals. He goes, "We're getting the rare earth. We're going to get the rare earth from Ukraine." Yeah,
I mean, that's so grim because, frankly, what the American military is doing, or American Uncle Sam is telling Ukraine is conscript younger people, and I don't know. At a certain point, like you're forcing people to fight. That's what conscription is. And you're saying we're taking your resources. Like, is this really headed some good place? Is this headed to save democracy? I don't think so.
No, but there's just something very notable in that clip. Is, as you were saying, Laura Ingraham is a Roman salute aficionado. There's been lots of kind of reporting about her earlier life and some of the organizations and groups that she was interested in, some of the theories and ideas about humanity and our similarities and differences, let's say. And then, right, so that represents a particular wing of the Trump movement, Trump Republican Party. And then there's Patrick Bet-David, who is pure salesman, pure just like grifter, wants to be on TV. It's got to be on TV, right? And I would like it more than anything if on Trump's shoulder it was a kind of like an angel versus a devil trying to get him, helping him make decisions. But that is really the two shoulders of Trump. The two people standing on their shoulder is like pure kind of grifter, salesman, slimy guy. And a Roman salute loving figure. And the question is, who's going to win out? Because the thing that Laura Ingraham is getting at is actually one of the right-wing guys' big criticisms of Trump is that when he was president the first time, he got controlled and he didn't actually, create the great American empire and lead us to 1,000 years of glory.
Right. Yeah. And, here's another one. That's a key point. Like, obviously, and Douthat and Steve Bannon had a talk on the New York Times. I don't know if you saw that, but
no, I didn't.
At one point, like, Bannon's like, and there's all these Republicans that are pussies that are going to say we should just deport like the criminals and stuff, but actually we need to deport every one of them. And Ross Douthat very feebly is like, well, actually, that's my position. And I gotta say, that's not enough, Ross. When someone confronts you with that shit, you say, yeah, motherfucker, that's me. I think you're the fucking weirdo. And it's the inability of conservatives and frankly liberals to like really, I mean, maybe liberals would be a little bit better at that, but like, that's just pussy shit to not, and like now I see like Canadians that are like upset about Trump's thing.
We'll have
being
more
like,
for that in the post game for sure.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay. Stay tuned. Patreon.com/Left Reckoning. Here's the Caitlin Collins thing, though, where they're talking about this tariff thing. This is just another sort of on the same theme of these tariffs. And again, like you look at the Financial Times and it was business leaders are pissed at Trump. The Chamber of Commerce, all these other groups are like,
I mean, this is the thing you got to remember. Those are the people whose phone call he's picking up, you know?
It's ravaged hometowns. Everyone understands the fentanyl crisis. But one, the amount of fentanyl that comes from Canada is nowhere near the scale of the southern border. A lot of it comes through legal ports of entry. But on this specifically, he called this off, saying that he had won concessions from both of them. But is there a tangible concession in your view?
Yeah, absolutely. He won the concessions, and part of it is it's a commitment from Trudeau that wasn't there, to help with fentanyl, to help with the black market,
he announced the plan,
and to secure the border.
He announced that plan, though, 6 weeks ago, back in December.
Well, at least he's reiterated it and formalized it.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's really funny. to to see these guys kind of struggling to come up with an answer here. I mean, I think the funniest thing is that the way Trump's talking and what he was talking about, I think kind of famously with Trudeau, is that like, hey, what would make this easier is if you just become the 51st state. As if Trump really just starts pushing for like an American EU, right? If like the right wing God King emperor is just sort of pushing for like a new trade deal and maybe like a stronger supranational government, maybe one where each country has representatives and like a shared Congress or something like that. It would be a hilarious irony of history if Trump just kind of recreates the European Union, but for the Americas.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to take a lot of.
It's going to take
Maybe
a lot
Kushner can get on that this time.
get Kushner on that. Send Musk up there, who's lost a lot of money on this kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, it's already been, I think, a very enlightening, frankly, Trump week. A lot of horror, a lot of things to be very worried about. A lot of goofiness, a lot of bluster, and frankly, not a lot getting done. Do we want to talk about one of these other figures before we go to the post game and look at some of these Canadian reactions that we
Yeah.
have loaded up? And we have to talk about it as a socialist podcast. I mean, what's going on with the wealthiest person in the world? Basically, he collected a group of like little boys, and he's just sort of unleashed them into the Eisenhower Building in DC. Is now kind of harassing people of all different, of multiple different departments in the U.S. government. I mean, it's really frightening stuff.
Yeah, and really using those kids. I mean, I think absolutely this whining about Wired publicizing their identities. I'm sorry, you get a job like that, you get publicized. But Elon is very clearly like he's not picking 20-year-olds because they have a good sense of what's going on in the world. Let's be real. He's doing it because they're pliable and willing to stay there for 40 hours, straight. But overall, like, yeah, it is not just Musk, but it's not like you see any kind of major other capitalist tech billionaires saying shit. All the guys who lined up for the inauguration. And if you had told me what was happening in 2011, like the richest man on earth and all these tech billionaires off of just decade of low interest funny money being injected into their sorts of industry, turning all of that wealth onto our government and taking it over and getting into sensitive areas of the treasury and personal management and getting access to the systems and scraping it with their artificial intelligence robot, because that's really what AI's those are the unconquered lands of AI, is large data sets that aren't scraped by their competitors. And so, yeah, now Elon gets to put all that shit through Grok, I guess, unless something is able to step into his way.
Yeah, and I think that's totally true. It's also, as you noted and others have noted, an extremely dangerous thing for somebody who not only is the wealthiest person in the world, but somebody who basically has made all of their money off of U.S. government contracts, basically getting access to the payment system of said government. I mean, the conflict of interest is glaring, but the fact of the matter is, like, this isn't even a position that anyone. It's not even like, oh, we're upset by Musk being now new government payment czar or whatever. It's that Musk is creating a new position for himself, which is not legal, by the way. And he is now infiltrated, I think, some of the most sensitive parts of government. The ability to cause a lot of chaos is significant here. I mean, the amount of payments that the United States federal government has to be engaged in on a daily, hourly basis is massive. We're talking about potentially not just like cutting funding for things, literally things that have mandates from Congress, from the government to be funded that won't be funded. I mean, there was worries about this. We were talking about this last week, when they were basically waging war against Medicaid. Right. I mean, this is unprecedented, and it just sort of shows how there really is nobody home.
Yeah.
In the government at this point, right? Nobody's sort of defending and overseeing this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really, I'm not downplaying the severity of what's going on to say this is the culmination of basically the entire neoliberal project. Like the way Bill Clinton and DLC Democrats talked about ending welfare as we know it and shit like this. Well, it's like, what's the end point of just saying fuck all this stuff that people supposedly rely on? Is you're going to eventually get more corporate partners like Elon Musk to come in and say, yeah, fuck all this stuff. Who gives a shit? And it's the problem with the Democrats for longer than we've been alive is it's not a party that has any kind of vision about where you can go to. It's a party that just wants to maintain a system that they inherit and hope it works out in the end, and hope that they can, become wealthy. And that part has been taken care of. As far as like the long-term effects of democracy, this is probably what it felt like for conservatives to live through the New Deal. And the truth is, the Democratic Party elites have spent the last 10 years snuffing out the next New Deal, whether it's Medicare for all or a Green New Deal or those sorts of initiatives. They've strangled them in the crib. And at a certain point, a vision needs to present itself, because you can't just roll whatever remains of the New Deal neoliberal thing through the next fucking century.
Yeah, I mean, and talking about that, and something that's very important to all of us. I saw that Kim Kelly was tweeting out on reported on Twitter that Kim Kelly, if you don't know them, incredible labor journalist, writing about how they had gotten a tip that members of the Department of Labor have basically now been instructed to allow Musk's guys to sort of poke around the Department of Labor. I mean, this is somebody who, again, operates one of the most hostile anti-union companies in the country. This is somebody who is working on behalf of Donald Trump, who's collected an assortment of billionaires. Amazon has a case basically saying that the Department of Labor, the NLRB in particular, is illegal. And we've already seen Trump illegally fire and remove somebody from the NLRB, which basically has put them in a position where they're not able to act. So effectively has pulled that back. And then who knows which other kind of attacks that we'll be seeing. But I'll tell you that a company like Amazon, a company like Costco, a company like Ford, they're very interested to know about what the Department of, the Department of Labor has been up to, right? What information that they have. So beyond just like, the questions of like payments, right? Which understandably has gotten a lot of people freaked out. It is all of this. That this guy who has particular motivations to wage war on working people, to wage war on our labor protections in this country, now has access to that. I mean, it is something that should worry you. But as you were saying, Matt, I think this has to be the lesson, is that, and the same thing we're talking with Alex, is that, hoping for some kind of procedural move here. I mean, they have effectively pulled the history back on this, right? And hoping that like the NLRB and the Department of Labor can become, more vibrant and all of this kind of stuff is fine. But the same thing with Lena Khan, right? Lena Khan worked really hard at the FTC, did a lot, to really change the game, things that I, support, think are great. But you see, she's out now. All of that's going to get unraveled very quickly. And the point is not to despair and to sort of say like, oh, well, nothing can be done. It's actually to recognize that the fight is much more direct and larger than I think most liberals in particular believe, right? It's not about just getting the right person in the right department for the right amount of time. It's actually upending a lot of these systems, which are very clearly going to be on their way out and to be severely broken if Musk and Trump get their way.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing is, I don't actually think that they can create a order as stable as the New Deal order was.
They can't. Yeah,
right.
That's a good
and
point.
So that's going to be where the effort needs to be, is try to fill, because something needs to be built, because shit's going to really hit the fan. I think here, like, especially if they're talking about Department of Education gonzo now. Let's see. It's interesting that you go to the Treasury before the Fed, but
I mean, what's truly dangerous about this moment, and I think one of the kind of unfortunate lessons that is going to be learned by Trump and Musk, is the fact that capitalism is an extremely unstable system, right? And the American legal system, the American government, and the American economy have been sort of designed to sort of paper over like some of the fundamental contradictions of American capitalism. Look at like the first century of American society, Matt, and you'll read about something called the Panic, which just seemed to be an almost perpetual state of affairs in American economic life. FDR deals with the Great Depression, right? It was actually like a way to sort of push down some of these contradictions, not solve them, right? Because we see many financial crises, a big one that we lived through, come into being. But the fact of the matter is, like, a lot of the stuff that they're breaking right now was set up to try to give the system some level of stability. That's why Trump is getting the calls that he's getting from people about the tariffs, right? And we'll see if he just sort of like follows their instructions, or if he allows these guys who I think their eyes are a little bit bigger than their stomachs, frankly, for what's coming, get their way when it comes to unraveling the state. I mean, we haven't done much on Malay here, but Musk is obviously, he's just a very strange guy who sees things on the computer, and he wants to be seen like that kind of figure. He very much like is into Malay, I think, certainly ideologically, but he also likes the idea of like, oh, I'm so great at just destroying bureaucracy, just like Malay. There's a big difference. The American like state is a very different thing than the Argentine one. Sorry, it just is. And I'm not even saying that in support of all the things that Malay is doing, but like, we're not talking about equivalent cuts here, or even equivalent economies, right? So, I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of very, if they're able to go through this kind of stuff, and I don't say this to take away worry about it, right? But we also have to sort of watch what is actually happening, because everyone's seeing this, basically this man baby like standing on a cliff, and we don't know, if they're just going to walk back or if they're going to actually jump here. We basically, we don't know until we know what is happening. What we're seeing is like there's somebody like messing around with some things that they really shouldn't be. We'll see actually more materially what the effect will be. But if they start fucking with the stuff, it will be really bad.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine, like, the way JP Diamond, I don't know if you saw him saying, look, they voted for it. If there's some minor pain in the meantime, but we can do tariffs. So like those guys, I think they're ready to take advantage of, frankly, turmoil.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think it's a little bit hubristic, and they might not have but I think they feel confident. And typically the super wealthy benefit from stuff like that.
Yeah, no. I mean, they're hoping to buy everything at a discount. I mean,
Yep.
What better than another crisis where, they're, especially if you have another Trump. Don't forget, what Trump did in response to the COVID crisis, right? You saw this through Trump and the Fed. They just basically pumped money into the pockets of the wealthiest people and the wealthiest corporations on the planet, much like they did after the first financial crisis, right? So there's a hope here that, maybe they break it. Things can get sold to these big companies, these big hedge funds at a discount, and the money's backed by Uncle Sam. I mean, I think you told me it was David Dayen who said that this is going to be administration of vandals, and like this is probably a pretty good example of that. We got to go over to the post game, Matt, but there's something we have to do on the main show before we do that, and that's to talk about two of the most odious people on the planet, and what was said today. The Biden administration, Kamala Harris, oversaw a genocide in Gaza. Trump is now meeting with Netanyahu, the man who's responsible personally for that genocide. And the things Trump is saying here, are very shocking and worrying.
Peter? Would Palestinians have the right to return to Gaza if they left while the rebuilding was happening?
It would be my hope that we could do something really nice, really good, where they wouldn't want to return. Why would they want to return? The place has been hell. It's been one of the meanest,
Look at that ugly ass smile on that freak. I just
Evil, man.
For people who are listening. I mean,
meanest, toughest places on earth. And right now, it's. I've seen every picture from every angle, better than if I were there. And nobody can live there. You can't live there. So if we can build them through massive amounts of money supplied by other people, very rich nations, and they're willing to supply it. If we can build something for them in one of the countries, and it could be Jordan, it could be Egypt, it could be other countries, and you could build 4 or 5 or 6 areas. It doesn't have to be one area, but you take certain areas and you build really good quality housing, like a beautiful town, like someplace where they can live and not die. Because Gaza is a guarantee that they're going to end up dying. The same thing's going to happen again. It's happened over and over again, and it's going to happen again as sure as you're standing there, Peter. So I hope that we could do something where they wouldn't want to go back. Who would want to go back? They've experienced nothing but death and destruction. Who would want to?
Yeah, I mean, what can you say to that, Matt?
Probably who would want to go back is the people who live there and are going back and celebrate the ceasefire that you briefly took credit for because you just wanted to stick a thumb in the eye of admittedly weak and genocidal Democrats. Jordan and Egypt have said no to that. Yeah. That's a long-standing desire. I mean, I remember we used to have this caller, Greg, on Majority Report that used to always call him when Michael was hosting. And Michael used to always mock him with an Israeli accent, being like, why don't the Jordan take them? And it's just like, why are we talking about ethnic cleansing?
Yeah.
Which is frankly like, a euphemism for genocide. And the idea you can just move people, to what fancy apartment buildings? Israel is bombing regularly its neighbors, wherever they are, because terrorists live there. Do you think Egypt and Jordan, even from a self-interested standpoint, want to take that risk? That all of a sudden, one of these new Kushner Heights Egypt, all of a sudden gets a missile in it because, the IDF got some intel about some people that we just removed from the land that they've lived on for centuries, it still has a problem with it.
No, I mean, I think you're 100% right. I mean, Netanyahu has shown that they will follow Palestinians to the ends of the earth in their mission to not only expel them from their land, but to eradicate them. You see this, you see this even with Gaza. Remember, Palestinians who live in Gaza, like there's been people who live there for a long time, but the reason so many Palestinians are in Gaza is because they have been eradicated from their homes across Palestine and forced into Gaza. Right. So the idea that it's like, oh, well, this is just some kind of like historical accident that there's all these people here. No, they were put into a pen to be killed. And they want to complete that mission. That is what Netanyahu wants. And you think if you move it a little bit south or a little bit east, that's going to change? You're absolutely right. No, it won't.
Right, that's an important point. Like that Gaza is in large part refugees of the 48 expulsion of Palestinians from their homes, where a lot of them maintain keys from the properties which have been taken over by Israelis. And yeah, the idea that those people, which should be frankly moving in the opposite direction, they should be moving back into their ancestral homes because you cannot displace people through acts of war. That's what's called a war crime. Our entire the international law that was just thrown overboard by liberal Zionists in the last administration is explicit about those things. The same international legal order that created Israel itself.
Yeah, and the official policy of the United States government has been this: Israel can kill as many Palestinians as they want. Hell, they can kill Americans. There's no reason to stop at Palestinians alone. Happily, the Biden administration was quiet as the Netanyahu regime killed Palestinians and also Palestinian Americans. That started way before this most recent slaughter, right? This has been a long-standing story of the way that the American government has no interest in not even protecting the Palestinians, but also protecting its own American citizens from Israel. And you're seeing Trump doing the same thing that American presidents have done my entire life, at least, which is being completely subservient to this genocidal and maniacal and evil regime.
Absolutely.
Well, we'll be here, as will the people of Palestine, always standing in solidarity. And folks, there's going to be a lot going on over this next few months. I mean, we'll see how long. One thing we didn't talk about with Musk, Matt, is that the way he's doing this is on his special government employee status, which we talked about 2 weeks ago when we sort of broke down, what Doge was. But the SGE, the special government employee, does have a timeline. I think it's like 100 days, 130 days, something like that. So it will be interesting to see how long this chapter goes. But anyways, while this is happening, there's going to be a lot of kind of bizarre and weird things going on, and we couldn't be here talking about it without all of y'all. So please consider supporting the program if you haven't already at patreon.com/leftreckoning. We're not just asking for a handout, though. We give you a lot more. We give you 2-to-1 on the other side. And this one, I think, is going to be really fun. Matt and I have compiled some excellent videos of some Canadians who are learning for the first time that they are not part of the team.
Yeah, it was easy for them when both liberals were in the White House and whatever they have in Ottawa. What is the like executive
don't make me
residence?
do it. I can't remember.
I don't know. Where does Canadian Prime Minister live?
It's
Sorry,
something
Canadians.
Street. I mean,
it's not like 10 Downing Street is 24 Sussex Drive.
Oh, let's go.
Okay, I'd never heard that in my life before.
Sorry, friends. This
is not quite 10 Downing
even
Street.
Us enlightened lefties have no idea about what's going on there. And I'll tell you that chud Republicans don't care either. So all of these Canadian guys who thought, America was looking out for them, I'm sorry to say, that's not the case.
Oh man, it's the funniest thing in the world. The guys and also I'm going to play that Polyev response to Trump too, because I just like his weird self getting cross currents of all this. It's so funny.
It's really, really funny. So you won't want to miss that. Patreon.com/leftreckoning. Get access to the post game. We'll be over there in just a couple of minutes. So come hang out with us a little bit.
Peace.